seen the decision today by the Constitutional Court that SARS must now make what's described in law as a new decision about whether it will hand over the tax details of former President Jacob Zuma to journalists working for the Financial Mail and the AmaBhungane Centre for Investigative Journalism. Under the law, up until this case, a taxpayer's details were always kept secret. While Zuma was still present, the journalist Jacob Zuma published claims that he had received a salary from a security company. Well, actually, President, that would have been illegal. A president is not allowed to receive an income from any other source. Rob Rose is the editor of Financial Mail. Rob, good afternoon to you. So there have been several cases, several applications on what you want here. What does today's judgment by the Constitutional Court actually mean?
Well, Stephen, it means that in this case they've decided that certain elements of the Tax Administration Act, which basically ensures that taxpayer information is always kept confidential, can be overruled, is essentially constitutionally invalid if there's a strong public interest case to be made. In that case, then, if you can make out a case that there's a public interest in revealing the information and there's less harm in doing so, then you can actually get the information from SARS. Essentially, it paved the way for SARS to give us Jacob Zuma's tax records from 2010 to 2018. We have to submit a new application to SARS for that, and then we should get it.
So it says that you can. It doesn't mean that SARS actually has to do it, right? SARS could still say no. They could turn your application down.
They could turn it down again, but it certainly means that the blanket decision of the tax authorities to simply say we can't give you any information because it's secret doesn't hold anymore. So that's what the Constitutional Court decision means. So SARS can find another ground to refuse our application, but the view that, we can't give you tax details because they're always secret just doesn't hold water anymore. And it's an important step forward for the promotion of access to information, which, as you know, Stephen, politicians have routinely ignored in this country. So I think it's a good judgment for transparency.
Up until this point, the taxpayers' affairs have always been kept secret, as you point to. That's what the law said. Why do you think, and there are reasons for that. I mean, just about everyone who pays tax wants their tax details to be kept secret. Why do you think there is a case, a public interest case, to see the tax details of former President Zuma now?
Well, as you mentioned in your intro to this, Jacob Zuma's book specifically talked about the fact that the president, who was essentially in charge of the country, the head of state, wasn't tax compliant himself, and had got income from a variety of duplicitous means, not just the Guptas, but from other people who had him on his payroll. That's important for tax morality in the country, and I think it's an important indication of where we are as a country and that our government leaders are honest. So, this particular judgment doesn't mean that everyone's tax affairs it's open season on everyone's tax affairs and we all can see whoever's tax records we want. But if there's a compelling public interest case, like in this case where the former head of state was involved, you can certainly make up an argument, and there is now going to be a legislative way in which SARS will be allowed to hand over those records.
It would also set a precedent, right? It would mean you could do the same for President Cyril Ramaphosa over, for example, Phala Phala.
Absolutely. And in that case, it might completely be justified. It doesn't mean that you can then go to the court, like I said, and just ask for Stephen Curtis's tax records to be handed to you just because you're interested. But certainly if there's a strong public interest case to be made and there's evidence for it, you can certainly say, the wider public interest favors us granting this request and handing over the tax records, and we will do, the public interest, the interest of public interest. Sorry, I mangled that a bit, but the public interest essentially outweighs the harm that will be done by handing over those tax records.
So there's quite a lot that goes on here, because you would need a case. You would need what I suppose judges and lawyers call probable cause. You would need to know something. You would need evidence of wrongdoing first, right? So you would need evidence that I've been hiding something in my tax if you wanted to see it.
Yeah. So this was actually what dominated a lot of the court discussion in the Constitutional Court when this matter was argued a couple of months ago. The judges were quite, they pushed this argument quite a lot, SARS's argument, that essentially you'll compromise the willingness of people to be upfront about their taxes if you're going to allow people to access those records. So that was an argument that the judges tested quite heavily, and in the end it was quite a contentious decision. It was 5 judges in favor of releasing the tax records in this particular case versus 4 who didn't. So clearly it's not an open and shut case as far as the judges were concerned. But there was quite a strenuous debate about what this does for tax morality, and And I suppose how it'll play out will be interesting to see.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, that's one of SARS's main arguments, isn't it? That they require people to actually say this is the money that they received. And Paulo is a great example of this because, and I suppose so is the Zuma case, because he actually said to SARS, I received this income. Now, the fact that he was telling SARS, or as we understand it, that he may have been telling SARS that he had also broken the law is quite a strange thing. We could start to see an end to that. People will just lie more than maybe they already do when it comes to their tax.
You know, the thing is that one of the arguments was that, you know, if we have errant people like money launderers and we have disclosure of the tax affairs, then the money launderers might not want to come clean about their taxes. And I think one of the judges said essentially that that's a pretty poor argument because money launderers and crooks aren't about to tell you what their real income is anyway. So that's not exactly going to hold much water. And ultimately, you know, if your society benefits from the transparency of it, if you know that your head of state didn't pay tax, for example, for a number of years, you know, there's a strong public interest element to that, which I think outweighs the potential downside of releasing these tax details. And, you know, Stephen, the judges were very clear that this is not in every case. It has to be a pretty strong argument and based upon facts. There was quite a lot of evidence and, you know, documents in Jacques Poe's book where he talked about this and what actually this meant for Jacob Zuma, and I think that is ultimately what swayed the judges in this case. I mean, also the fact that Jacob Zuma didn't himself defend the initial case until after the High Court had given the decision against him and against SARS on this matter, so that probably didn't help him in the end.
There's a lot that's going to happen now, and one of them is that you, I presume, will now apply to SARS, you and the AmaBhungane Centre for Investigative Journalism, and say, we want to see this information, please. They can still say no, right? So you would have to go back to court to have that decision overturned if that's what happened.
Absolutely, and that's entirely possible. It does remain to be seen what happens. I might find another argument against handing over these records, and clearly the fact that SARS defended this in the first place indicates that they aren't so keen to turn it over. So all we can do is approach it one particular court step at a time, and that's where we are at the moment.
Rob Rose, thank you, the editor of Financial Mail. Really do appreciate the time. Well,